You are listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. I'm Elena Paweta, Executive Communication Coach and TEDx organizer. With each episode, I'll share with you communication tips and ideas from top business leaders to help you excel in your career. Hello. Welcome to the next episode of Ideas and Leaders podcast. Today, I have a great guest, and this is Lisa Marie Platske. She left her career as a federal law enforcement officer after 9/11 to become the CEO of international leadership development company Upside Thinking. Lisa Marie is an award-winning leadership expert recognized by the White House and Small Business Administration. Wow, Lisa Marie, I'm so happy to have you on Ideas and Leaders today.
Thank you, Dr. Elena. I'm just delighted to be here with you.
So, Lisa Marie, you are passionate about leadership, just as I am, and I think that even much more. Looking at your impressive bio and what you're doing, I would really like to talk about your approach to leadership, and how do you see leaders in a challenging world, as we have a lot has changed in the last couple of years, and it is so hard for business leaders, for corporate leaders right now. So I think that all leaders want to have an impact in their organizations, in the world. So do you think it is now harder for leaders to actually have a great impact?
I love this question because there are levels to leadership or layers to leadership. And so the idea of leadership years ago was so centered around a title, around what somebody's title was and whether or not that made them the leader. And that so is not leadership in today's world. What your title is matters less than whether or not people are following you. Leadership is, if you're somebody that doesn't have followers, you look behind you and there's nobody who's going where you're going. Well, you're not the leader, no matter what you call yourself. And when we look at impact as being the next component, I see that that's influence. And then impact is, how do you do that? How do you become somebody where the work that you do, the words that you use, they create legacy and impact in order to make a bigger positive difference in the world. And so today, when you speak about challenges and what's changed and what's been going on, there've been so many unique facets to what's happened globally for leaders to contend with on a daily basis. And depending on how many tools you've got in your toolbox, depending on how you actually utilize your own leadership wisdom, your leadership IQ, depends on how many people are actually following you and want to go where you're going within your organization, or whether you have a business and you've got people that are seeking to be your client. And that is dependent upon how much impact you actually have in the world and whether or not the work that you're doing is actually meaningful. So it's just such a, it's something where I see that without impact, I think that you're missing out on the meaning piece.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, as you mentioned, there are layers to leadership. So can you expand on this? Can you say something more about those layers? What do you think, or the levels of leadership? How do you see it?
Yeah, that's where I see that leadership is somebody makes the decision that they say, okay, I want to be someone who is a leader, and I'm going to put in these pieces in place. And there's tactical steps to leadership, and there's also steps to what I call the beingness of leadership. And the tactical steps on being a leader, the how-to steps. For myself, I had a journey where I was involved in leadership through what I would call, and it's certainly not accident, but I was failing at or truly struggling when I was in federal law enforcement. And so I wanted to figure out, how do you get to be somebody who's a leader worth following? How do you get to be somebody who's that kind of a leader? And so that, and that's what I would say is sort of the beginning piece of leadership is, how do you figure out what are those components? And so for myself on my journey, I went and signed up for a leadership development program where there were a series of assessments. And the assessments are often based on a variety, bodies of research. So each assessment has a body of research. I happen to love Kosis and Posner's work. They have 4 qualities of leaders that are most important. One is integrity. Second step, or this not step, but the second component that research shows is most important is forward thinking, and that's that visionary. The third one is inspiration, not necessarily charisma, but somebody that's inspiring or can have an inspiring vision to get behind. And 4 is competence. So as I'm in this leadership development training and I'm going through the programs, and like I said, each one, whether it was Myers-Briggs that we took or whether it was a profile or assessment, there was one assessment that we got the results back and it was not pretty. It was really not pretty. The instructor shouted out to the class that I was a 0. And it's incredibly painful to share that, because that part of my life, just to go back to that, she didn't stop there. She continued on with the feedback that was given and pretty much said that, I wasn't somebody who liked to be around people, and I certainly didn't want to spend time with people, which really was so not true at all. It was just simply that there were walls that I had built to keep myself safe that actually kept me away from having a meaningful and happy life. And so I had a conversation with myself that went something like this, Lisa, you might be incredibly strong and tough. You might be smart and right, but you're going to be alone and dead if you don't figure out how to connect. And if you don't figure out how to be somebody who can be a leader that's worth following. And so on that journey, I did a lot of research. That's where I found Kosis and Posner. That's where I found other people. I studied leadership, thousands of hours of studying leadership and studying connection and positioning. And ultimately, the steps that I took were about getting curious about what mattered to other people, paying attention to how people spoke and how they being able to speak to their listening. And what ended up happening is doors opened. I became somebody who was the fastest promoted officer at the time in my position, promoted very, very quickly, with less than 4 years, into my first supervisory position, and then climbed the ranks from there. And so that idea of leader worth following and those tactical skills, those are the ones that open doors immediately. And then after that, you want to create, to be somebody who is a greater influencer from leader, is somebody an influencer where you're what you're doing and what you share actually matters to more people. You're now at the place where you're looking to build partnerships with other people so that the influence that you have actually has the ability to touch more lives. And then once you move on to the next layer of leadership, I see that as being somebody who's a world changer. There's the leader, the influencer, and the world changer. And the world changer is what you spoke about, which is the impact. And to be somebody who actually has impact, you not only have to have influence, you not only have to have this idea of connection, but you have to have this understanding of yourself. That's that beingness of leadership, an understanding of yourself so well that you're not in the tactical doingness of leadership. You're actually embodying it, and you're modeling it by how you live your life, by how you actually show up in the world. And I would say that percentage of leaders that I've found that actually take that journey and do it well is a very small percentage. because the beingness of leadership versus the doing and the tactical side requires doing work on yourself, work on forgiveness, work in transparency, vulnerability. Those are layers that even themselves continue on. There are layers to vulnerability and forgiveness and transparency and it doesn't really matter whether or not the person is someone who works in a company and is a leader, C-suite on down, or whether it's somebody who has a business and is looking to attract greater talent, or whether or not there's someone who's seeking to have a greater, a more robust clientele. It doesn't matter. These are skills that without them, you can only go so far. John Maxwell speaks about it as the law of the lid. You hit the lid and there's only so far that you can go, regardless of how much motivation you have, how much drive you have, how hard you work, if you hit the leadership lid. And so that's what I really see as these layers of leader, influencer, world changer, where you're really using your impact, you're using your influence to make a greater impact in the world.
Yeah, it is amazing that we need to start from ourselves and we need to understand ourselves, because very often we think as a new leaders, new team leaders, we start thinking about how to motivate people, how to conduct meetings and all of those, technical things. But in fact, we need to understand ourselves and understand what kind of leader we can be, because we cannot be someone else. Very often we try to model someone we know, but everyone is different. And you mentioned vulnerability. It is very interesting because leaders are usually perceived as, and we want as leaders, we want to be perceived as strong leaders who know we know where we are going, we know the goals, we are leading everyone. And vulnerability is something that is very often, especially in the corporate world, it is hard to be vulnerable leaders. So do you think it is an important asset for a leader? And if yes, then why?
Yeah, so when I first opened my business 16 years ago, I wanted to figure out, what do you do how do you create a shortcut? Here I am, I'm coming from federal law enforcement. How do I open my business and be able to do it so that it can grow quickly? What is it? And so I started to interview leaders, and I came up with 7 pillars of leadership. And then after I had those 7 pillars of leadership and really recognized what you said, that need for going into self, that idea of really who am I, and better understanding who I am, not modeling after somebody else. I went, so what are the leaders who are the most courageous do? Like the ones that you just go, wow, like that person's not just good, they're incredible. Like I so want to work with them. They are just this amazing, courageous leader worth following. And so I started to study, are there different characteristics of courageous leaders? Are there different characteristics of courageous leaders that are worth following? And there were 3. And the second one was vulnerability. And what was so interesting about that was vulnerability is often, there's a misperception of what it actually is. Now, the definition of it is to place oneself in harm's way. And that doesn't sound exciting. That doesn't sound like you would want to do it. Even for myself, I mean, I have no desire for people to see me as vulnerable. I would much rather have somebody see me as strong. And I spent the majority of my life working on that so that people would see me as both in law enforcement and in business, as somebody who had the answers, as somebody who got it right, as somebody who was the A+ student, somebody who was the who could be counted on. And so the idea of vulnerability when I was doing this research was not like, yay, this is a good thing. It was more like, oh, well, what is that about? So I recognized the more that I had conversations with people, it's not a marketing tactic. It's not something that you put on and you take off, meaning you put it on and go, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable now. Okay, I'm going to take it off and now I'm not vulnerable. It's so much a way of being. And it's how you model your vision. So vision was the first part of courageous leadership. And the second part was vulnerability, because it's how it gets modeled. And vulnerability only happens, vulnerability only happens when forgiveness is present. And so that means self-forgiveness, that means forgiveness of others, that means truly looking at the places in your life that are out of alignment with your core values, aligned with whatever it is that you are most taking a stand for in the world. And so when I looked at, well, why this person at this company, why them, or why this entrepreneur, why this business owner, why do they seem to have people who come to them and say, I want to work for you? Why do they have people who are constantly reaching out and saying, I want to transfer onto your team? Why are they organizations that truly are what I would call pandemic proof? Like, they're not ones that are struggling. What is it in that leader? And this level of vulnerability is one where, in modeling it, they're not looking to prove that they're perfect. They're not looking to prove they have all the answers. They're looking to take responsibility and look inside themselves and go, okay, where is it that I'm not in full alignment? And they're sharing that in a way that doesn't erode trust. Rather, it builds connection and allows for it to be seen as a strength.
Yes, I think that the best leaders that I worked with, they are most definitely vulnerable leaders who say that, yes, I'm not perfect. I don't know all the answers, and they are looking for the answers from their team, right? They are cooperating, they are when I was working with such leaders, I've always felt safe, and I felt that I matter, even though I did not. Sometimes I was somewhere in the lower position, but I always felt that, yes, I matter. I'm a very important person in this team, because this leader always just told me about this. And I really appreciate. I can think of two people in my life that I was working with. And I think that this vulnerability, it really gives us a lot in as leaders. We get, not only we get followers, but we can also build really great teams out of such motivated people. When they feel that they mean something, they are important, they are being trusted. This is this amazing what can happen. And Lisa Marie, I wanted to ask you about the current pandemic times. So what do you think, because it is important as a leader to connect, to create meaningful relationships. How can we do it in the current times of pandemic, when a lot of work is happening online and we have a lot of challenges connected with this?
You speak about this in terms of there being a changes that are going on, in more time, more screen time, more time that is spent outside of a traditional office, more time that is spent disconnected from others. And that's the important piece to remember. is that when you're looking at deepening relationships and you're looking at, what are the steps that I would take? It's one, connection's got to be important to you. And so I often say that there are blunders that people make when they're looking to connect with people. And in the connections, whether it's a team member, whether it's a family member, whether it's, peer-to-peer, boss to employee, that's really important, is understanding, number one, where your heart lies, because people get behind where your heart lies, not your knowledge. And that's that safety part that you spoke about, feeling that you matter, feeling that you're a VIP. And so going back to the connection part and the connection in the times that we're in, it really doesn't matter whether or not somebody's online or whether they're in person. You can tell how they make you feel. You can tell how important they make you feel by how attentive they are, by how present they are, by how in the moment they are. And that goes back to, I shared the blunders that people make. I said that there's 4 blunders. And so, the first one is that people who are, they're not in a place of asking questions. They're more sharing more about themselves versus curiosity. And that's, one of the blunders that somebody makes in deepening that or building the relationships. Like I say, whether it's a team member. And I was one of my examples of me not doing that and not doing that well at work. And the second thing is operating on that channel WIFM, which is what's in it for me. And by doing that, you're not only you're not asking questions, but you're also so focused on sharing your own stuff. And the third one is about operating, always being more interested in others than being interesting to them. These little things that you can do to allow for deeper connection. So whenever I have a meeting with somebody, showing up here to be with you, whenever I have something, it's am I in a place that can be distractionless as much as possible? I mean, things come up, but as much as possible, so that what you're communicating is you're important. And so when you talked about the manager and the person who made you feel that way, even though you were in a different, perhaps, a place in the organization, it wasn't a peer, but it was a supervisor employee relationship, you can still feel important. You can still feel like a VIP, and you get the opportunity to set up the environment for someone to feel that, to experience that. So I don't just have things on my calendar that I run out to do or go, oh my gosh, I have to go to this. I'm very intentional about what it is that I want to create in that experience. And it doesn't matter who it is. If it's a conversation with somebody that's my executive assistant, or whether or not it's somebody that's a potential client. And so, that ties into your values and whether or not people are important. And all of this ties into my 7 pillars of leadership. There's so much I could say about this, but I will pause there, because it's a topic that's, I look at it as, it doesn't have to be different in an online world. It's really how we make people feel.
Yeah. And I will ask you about your 7-step leadership model in a moment, because I'm very interested in it. I wanted to tell your story, which actually happened today. I was in a call with my colleague. We were talking, and he had a phone call, and his daughter was calling. So he said, sorry, I have to pick it up. So he picked it up, and then when he understood that there is no emergency, probably, he said, I'm sorry, I'm in a very important meeting right now. Can I call you back in a moment? And at this moment, I felt, oh, wow. I think that this is what we want to make other people feel, whether it is, recording a podcast, whether it is just having casual conversation. whether it is a team meeting. So we want to be, for every meeting to be a very important meeting and to make other people feel like that. We want to make other people feel important. And it really works miracles, you know, after someone tells that they are in a very important meeting, when talking to me, you know, I have this person just bought me, and I got several points to our relationship immediately. So I think that, yeah, definitely it is very important. Can you share a little bit about your 7-step leadership model? I'm sure that we cannot tell about everything during our podcast episode, but it would be great to get to know a little bit more about your model.
We can't get through it all. I mean, I actually have a 3-day conference, my Upside Summit, that I go through the 7 pillars. And even then I have, in 3 days, I'm still going, gosh, I wish I had more time. So you're right, we won't be able to do that. However, I will give you them and give you a way to be able to like use them right away, like give you something that you can put into place with that. And I just want to say, Dr. Elena, that the story that you shared is exactly the reason why these 7 pillars to me are important. Because if we can look at the reason why leadership, what leadership is all about, I see it as to make the world better. I see it as to use our gifts and abilities and talents and experiences to be a force for good in the world. And sometimes it's as simple as exactly what you experience is just telling people that they're important and being present for them. So I'm gonna get into that because it is part of those 7 pillars. So pillar 1 is starting with a written plan. And a written plan does not have to be complicated. It's beginning with the end in mind. The exercise that I would give you as sort of an immediately implementable strategy is writing down, I was this, I am this, I want to be this. Meaning, like, what's the past, what's the present, and what's the future, so that you're really clear about your vision. You were here. For me, I was in law enforcement. Here was my background. Here's where I am now, and here's where it is that I want to be. That's it. It doesn't have to be a complicated plan. Like sometimes people go, how many pages does it have to be? No, you just have to simply know what's your end in mind, where are you going? So that's number 1. Number 2 is understand your personality. And we talked about it a little bit. There are things that how you operate that will get in the way of your plan. There are ways that you operate that will help you get closer to whatever it is that you want. Understand who you're not, understand who you are. My 3 core values are excellence, accountability, and responsibility. It's who I want to work with. It's who's on my team. Be really clear about your personality and who you're not and who you are. The 3rd pillar is creating powerful partnerships. And with partnership, it requires connection. And we've talked about that quite a bit. You know, how you make people feel, the things that get in the way of connection that actually lead to partnership. The 4th one is live your priority. The word is priority, not priorities. So one thing, what's the one thing that you're moving towards? And everyone, that changes, and it changes moment for moment. And do you know what that one thing is in the moment that you're moving towards? There's 3 components to presence. Excuse me, there's one big thing with priority, and that is understanding the one thing that you're moving. Number 5 is creating a meaningful and memorable presence. And there's 3 components to presence. I was jumping ahead there. And one of those is being in the moment. Another one is positioning, understanding what to say, who to say it to, when to say it, how to say it. And the other one has to do with gratitude, being grateful for every single experience that you have. And there are things to do around that. How I keep gratitude front and center is every single day I write down what I'm grateful for. And maybe you've heard that. Maybe it's something that sounds so basic, but you just don't do it. It allows me to, at the end of every single day, when I write down 5 things that I'm grateful for, sometimes 6, sometimes 10, always 5, I write it down, and it allows me to go, regardless of what happened during the day, here's what it is that I, in this moment, can remember that has gone really well. Number 6 happens to be one of my favorites, and it's evaluate your progress. It's the profit piece for people who are small business owners and entrepreneurs, and for people who work for companies. It's important to understand that evaluation doesn't happen once a year at an annual review. Every single day, you have the opportunity to evaluate whether you're getting further away from what you want or closer to what you want. That's the reason why we start with the plan. What is it? Where are you going? And every day I'm asking myself, is this thing that I'm doing right now, is this podcast and being with you getting me closer or further away? Like, it's constantly me looking and evaluating where I'm going. I've got 5 questions, and if you want them, I can send them to you. It's just, what do you actually use to evaluate your progress? And number 7 is investing in personal or professional development. Investing in something that's in industry specific and something outside your industry every single year. Once a year, put it on your calendar. What are you going to do to invest in yourself? I take time off. I fly to places. I go travel far away, and people say, what in the world are you doing there? Was that for fun? Yes, it was for fun, and it was for business primarily, and I make it fun. Everything I do is fun, and it was a work event. So understanding that you've got to invest in yourself. When I was not doing well and I was struggling in law enforcement, I mentioned I went to that leadership academy. That was an academy that I paid for. It was something that I signed up for. The government didn't sign up for me. I knew that I needed to do something for me. And oftentimes people look for their employer or someone else to do something. Investing, if you truly want to be a leader worth following, these 7 pillars of leadership, I saw it in the research I did with hundreds of leaders, and this is something that they all subscribe to. And so, like I say, so much more I can say. At my Upside Summit, we spent 3 days on this, and that will at least give you some action items to put this in place right now. It's a few short hacks.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for giving us the tip of the iceberg of your 7-step model, and I really love it. I love all those steps, and I think it is so important to be able to implement it, to practice it. This is crucial, and I think that every step is just as important as all the other ones. So Lisa Marie, thank you so much for sharing a lot on Ideas and Leaders podcast. If our listeners want to know more about your model, want to know more about you, how can they contact you?
Best way to find me is at upsidethinking.com, UPSIDE, and the word thinking, THINKING.com. And on there is an influential leadership blueprint that you can have as my gift. And the blueprint actually talks about what happens if things are working out for you and they're good and you'd really like for them to be great. How do you do that? And how do you increase your own influence? There's 3 case studies in there, really easy blueprint. And there's actually, I love immediately implementable. I love like things to do and to take action immediately. So it's actually worksheets that you can fill out with that as well. And you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. We were talking about that. Those are my 2 favorites.
Perfect. We will share the links to your profiles for sure in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and for sharing all those golden nuggets with us.
So much, Dr. Elena. Pleasure being here.
Thank you for listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. Did you enjoy this episode? Let me know that you listened by tagging me in your LinkedIn profile and using a hashtag Ideas and Leaders. See you in the next episode.